collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Following a high-level conference in Nicosia earlier this week, on the programme today we discuss the economy.
And so if the rest of the world, rest of Europe and indeed the rest of the world slows down, Cyprus will suffer. And I think its rate of growth has been quite impressive in the last few years. But if China is slowing down, the US is slowing down, then I think Cyprus will slow down too.
Hear about sentiment in the UK after 3 years of Brexit deadlock.
Our political culture has coarsened considerably over the last 3.5 years, and MPs are worrying about their personal security in a way which many haven't for a very long time. There is a nasty atmosphere around the gates of Parliament with clashing groups of protesters.
Opportunities for regional stability in the Eastern Mediterranean.
The more important is that the need for all countries of the region, without exclusions, without excluding anybody, and working on a positive agenda, how we should, in the long run, when it's going to be possible, to form a regional organization in order to tackle the challenges of the region and take also advantage of the opportunities of the region.
And the future for hydrocarbons.
The development plan which has been submitted by the companies having the rights for Aphrodite are talking about first gas in 2025.
The 15th Cyprus Summit, organised by The Economist, took place in Nicosia earlier this week. Expert panels covered a variety of topics, from the economic environment, regional cooperation, energy, security, banking, and Brexit. I asked the conference coordinator and moderator, John Peet, who is the political and Brexit editor of The Economist, how they decided which issues should be included in the event.
Well, it's built around the agenda for Cyprus in general, and it does vary a little. We've had 15 of these. This is the 15th of these summits. But obviously we're interested in the economy of Cyprus. We've had one of these during one of the financial crises. We're interested in energy because of the gas finds in and around Cyprus. And that brings in geopolitics, security, the whole of the Eastern Mediterranean, and the sort of security angle with Turkey and others, and that is more or less the main stuff we want to hear discussed during this summit every year.
And it's been discussed at great length, with views coming from different political spectrums. But you particularly on Tuesday were discussing Brexit, and I seem to recall last year you were also discussing Brexit. It's going on and on and on. What's changed, if anything, since last year when we discussed this very issue?
Well, I mean, Britain's position in the European Union is obviously of broad interest, and it's of particular interest to Cyprus, which naturally has a strong relationship with Britain, both economically and politically. And the Brexit process has been very long drawn out. When we were here last year, we were talking about a Brexit deal that might be ratified, that might mean that Britain would left the European Union in March. But as we know, it's been constantly postponed, and we're now in the middle of an election campaign. And frankly, it depends a lot on the result of that election, what happens next on Brexit, including the question of whether Britain leaves at all.
What's your take on it, though? I mean, can you say if this group wins, it's likely to be that? We've had the thing pushed back now to the end of January. Suppose we come back with another hung parliament?
Well, I think if Boris Johnson and his Conservative Party wins a majority, then I can predict fairly confidently he will get the Brexit deal that he's done in Brussels passed by Parliament, and so we will move on to the next stage. We will then have left the European Union, but there will be a long negotiation about the future relationship lying ahead. If Boris Johnson does not get a majority, then I think it's very likely that whatever government emerges, which may well be one led by Labour rather than the Conservatives, could well end up putting the whole thing to another referendum. And the outcome of that referendum, highly uncertain. So I think if that were to happen, we might well spend a lot of next year with uncertainty about whether and when Britain would leave the European Union again.
This talk of another referendum, I mean, the people who voted however they did, it's the Remainers, I guess, who want another referendum, but it's not from what I've understood, actually another referendum saying, do you want to stay or do you want to go? It's a referendum saying, or would be, do you want this deal? And that's a little bit different, isn't it? Do people understand more now, do you think, about what comes after Brexit Day?
I think the British public has learnt much more about the European Union during the last 3.5 years than probably in the previous 45 years. But the precise terms of any referendum would depend, essentially, on what happens in the election. It's not even certain there would be a referendum at all. I mean, the Liberal Democrats, who are the sort of the third biggest party, they just wish to cancel Brexit altogether. And so if they were to emerge as a very large player, that could be on the agenda. But I think it all depends really on whether Boris Johnson wins his majority. And if he doesn't, I think we will probably have a referendum which would probably be put in terms of, do you want this deal or would you rather stay in the European Union? And the outcome of that referendum itself, very uncertain.
And finally, if you look at other things in the UK at the moment than just Brexit and what might happen afterwards, how would you put the state of the economy at the moment, and then with a view to possible world trade deals with the USA, deals with Europe and with other countries in the event of Brexit? Would it be good or bad for the British economy? I
think, given the uncertain outlook for the whole of the European economy, including the Eurozone economy, which looks much less healthy today than it did a year ago, this is a particularly challenging time also for the UK. And in the event of leaving next by the end of next January and moving on to the next stage of trade deals, which will take a long time to negotiate, both a trade deal with the European Union and any trade deals with third countries, I think I would predict that we're in for a period of quite high economic uncertainty. And indeed, there's quite a possibility that Britain, like some other parts of Europe, could fall into recession next year.
Yes, Germany is looking that way poised, I gather. What about the Cyprus economy? How much can you tell us about that? Because we weathered the storm, I think, but now we have the unions shouting again for the restoration of all sorts of things that they gave up during the crisis, and the finance minister warning that if we're not careful, bailout number 2 could be on the cards. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that the Cyprus economy has done much better than many people expected over the last 6 years. I mean, many people thought it would take much longer to recover from the crisis than it did, and in many ways it's been the model for all other troubled economies in the Eurozone. It's done better than almost all of the other ones that fell into difficulties during the crisis. But it is obviously a very open economy, highly dependent on trade, dependent to some extent on trade with the United Kingdom and with Germany. And so if the rest of Europe and indeed the rest of the world slows down, Cyprus will suffer. And I think its rate of growth has been quite impressive in the last few years. But if if China is slowing down, the US is slowing down, then I think Cyprus will slow down too.
It's very difficult, isn't it, in a global world to really buck any of these economic trends, however big your economy is.
I think that's right, and the ones who do well tend to be the ones who maintain the pace of reform, and Cyprus has done reform, but it probably continues to need to do more reform. And certainly if people try to reverse reforms, as some in Cyprus are trying to do, that's not going to be good for the economy.
And that is John Peet, the political and Brexit editor of The Economist, who was in Cyprus earlier this week for the 15th Cyprus Summit, organised by The Economist.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
And staying with that event, the opening session on Tuesday was entitled Brexit Complications and the EU. Latest developments. Joining John Peet on the stage was the former Director of Policy at No. 10 Downing Street, Joe Johnson, who also happens to be the brother of Boris Johnson, the UK's current Prime Minister. When I spoke to him afterwards, I asked him to describe the current sentiment in Britain as it faces a general election in December and 3 years of Brexit deadlock.
There's a new optimism, I would say. The fact is that Boris has got a deal with the European Union, which few people thought he would get. And not only did he get a deal, which changed many aspects which people on the ERG, the European Research Group wing of the Conservative Party, had objected to, but he then found a majority for it, at least at second reading, in the House of Commons. So there is renewed optimism that the deadlock can be broken. However, unfortunately, it hasn't been possible to get the deal through Parliament in its current form. The Labour Party and other opposition parties have played procedural games, and they've tried to prevent him from building on the momentum that he established for their own political reasons. And as a consequence, the government has called a general election to try and break this deadlock again. And the country is now going to the polls, as you know, on December the 12th. And that gives him an opportunity to come back, hopefully with a bigger majority, to get the deal through.
You resigned because you didn't like the deal originally, not this deal perhaps, but you're a Remainer at heart, I believe. So has your opinion changed?
Yes, absolutely. I'm a Remainer. I campaigned for Remain. I grew up in Brussels. I lived and worked in many different European countries over the years. I felt very happy with the idea that Britain's membership of the European Union was a net positive for the country, and that remains very much my view. I resigned not because I was dissatisfied with Boris's deal per se. I resigned before he even got his deal. I resigned because I didn't want to spend the next 5 years delivering on a policy I didn't really believe in at all. I didn't really want to spend the next 5 years of my life delivering Brexit. I remain of the view that it's a suboptimal outcome for the country. When you're doing things in life, you have to do them wholeheartedly. You have to be all in or not at all. And I decided it was fairer to everybody involved to step aside.
Of course, the big problem is going to be, whatever the outcome of the election, the effect that a Brexit will have on the United Kingdom, and particularly Scotland and Northern Ireland, because it seems that the deal includes a soft break for Northern Ireland. Scotland is then going to, doubtless, with Nicola Sturgeon, say, hey, hang on a minute, we voted to remain, what about us? Does this mean that the United Kingdom could break up completely?
Well, I think that's getting very much ahead of things. Of course, there are different views in different parts of the country, but the United Kingdom voted as a whole to leave in June 2016. Yes, Northern Ireland has a slightly different settlement with a softer Brexit that keeps it aligned with the single market on regulatory matters, so that it can continue to trade seamlessly with the Republic of Ireland with no hard border. And that will raise some calls from Scotland for similar treatment for Scotland. And those will have to be listened to very carefully. But the reality is, the United Kingdom voted to leave, and the government has concluded a deal. And the important thing now is to enable us to make progress as a country and move on to all of the other issues that people are thinking about. And that's why the government is working tirelessly on its so-called One Nation agenda, to invest in our health service, our schools, and to invest in our infrastructure and in our future, in our roads, our transport system, and in our research and development.
Regardless of what happens with the outcome of Brexit and indeed the election, talking about a one country when the split is pretty well down the middle and things have got very toxic. Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm here in Cyprus, but I try and cover what's going on in the UK. I talk to people in the UK who feel that everything's in a sense gone down the pan. They don't like the fact that people are at each other's throats. How do we get back to some form of unity?
Yes, our political culture has coarsened considerably over the last 3.5 years, and MPs are worrying about their personal security in a way which many haven't for a very long time. There is a nasty atmosphere around the gates of Parliament with clashing groups of protesters. And, the world of online media is particularly coarse at the moment. So yes, you're right. Our political culture has taken a turn for the worse, and it's vital that we move on as a country and try and put all this behind us as soon as we can and move on.
What about the nuts and bolts of what we were getting from the EU? And I'm thinking about for example, the space program. We were big players in that, and all the other things that we will lose. And
Well,
let's talk
yes
about
and- yes and
security.
no. I
Hang
mean-
on a minute, just about the sharing of data with the police forces, for
but
example.
I think that you don't actually necessarily lose those. I mean, the virtue of having a deal is that it gives you an implementation period to the end of 2020, during which you can negotiate the future relationship that could include all of those things you've just mentioned. It could
Then why are we leaving?
It could include R&D, it could include relationships on the security dimension and so forth. The government is giving effect to the referendum decision of June 2016 to
Which
leave
was
the European
advisory.
Union.
That's the thing that I think a lot of people don't understand, is that it was MPs who actually said, yes, go ahead and trigger it, even though an advisory
Yeah, of course,
referendum they
technically-
didn't have to.
Of course, technically it was advisory, but the reality was the political commitments had been made to implement the result, and that's a political fact of life. Yes, in a legal sense it may have been advisory, but it's up to Parliament to give effect to the result, all political parties having said they would do so. Otherwise you'd do grave damage to the credibility of our political system.
One last
Okay.
question. There's a new speaker.
Yep.
What effect do you think, as a former MP, that is going to have on the way Parliament operates in this very toxic time?
Well, I think it is important that we have a speaker who can bring out the best of MPs and who can ensure that they work collaboratively to find a way through a national crisis. And I hope Lindsay Hoyle will do that. He's a great man, and I've got every confidence that he'll be a good speaker. Thank you.
Joe Johnson, former Director of Policy at Number 10 Downing Street and the brother of the current UK Prime Minister. Cyprus Foreign Minister Nikos Christodoulidis spoke at the conference about the new opportunities which derive from new alliances, and he outlined for me afterwards the thrust of his speech.
The more important is that the need for all countries of the region, without exclusions, without excluding anybody, and working on a positive agenda, how we should, in the long run, when it's going to be possible, to form a regional organization in order to tackle the challenges of the region and take also advantage of the opportunities of the region. So the message, it was clear. We are here to work with all the countries of the region in order to be able, as I told you, to face the challenges. We don't believe that any country in the region by itself can face the situation as it is today.
All right, the opportunities, of course, are great, particularly when it comes to energy.
Not only energy. Energy was the turning point in order for all of us to come together, but there are much more potential. Trade, economy, tourism. So there are a lot of other sectors that we can work together, and this is a clear message to anybody. We don't exclude anybody.
There was also the sort of subcategory of whether or not the United States and the EU have common objectives in our region, and that's really quite important, isn't it?
Having in mind that European and American companies are involved in our exclusive economic zone, we can have the conclusion that both countries are interested in the energy developments in the region. That's why they also support the Energy Forum in Egypt and some other energy developments in the region. But we feel, and we can talk about the European Union because we're a member state and we participate in the decision-making process, that we need the European Union to be much more present in our region. For example, it is not possible to discuss how we'll solve the Syrian crisis and the European Union not being present and having a leading role. It is in our neighborhood. We are the ones, and I mean the European Union, that we are going to pay the price in case the situation in Syria continues as it is. For example, the migration issue is an issue for the Europeans. So we want, and this is the case that we are doing in Brussels all the time, we need much more EU engagement in our region.
Yes, but if we talk about the US policy in the region, that is actually, in a sense, opposite to our interests in many areas.
There is a perception for a number of countries in the region that the United States are not interesting for the Middle East. it's not up to me to say that. I mean, the perception, sometimes perception are right, sometimes are wrong. It's up to the United States to decide. That's why I told you I can comment on the EU issue, because we're a member state of the European Union and we participate in the decision-making process.
But if there's a flare-up, if there's anything in Iran, for example, which could be possible, or in general in our region, we are bang smack in the middle. So it's against our interest for there to be any further confrontations.
Of course, but in order to avoid any further confrontation, in order to avoid the problems of the region, we have to sit together and discuss. Otherwise, there is no way to solve the problem.
And how can you, with the tripartite groups that you've been trying to build,
was a first step.
How can you influence it?
Yeah, the tripartite was a first step, working on a positive agenda. The next step, it was Energy Forum in Cairo, for example. We have more than 3 countries participate, discussing about the energy developments in our region. It is our initiative about the climate change. All countries of the region, we sit around the table and we discuss about the climate change. We may have political differences, but it doesn't matter. Climate change is not going to affect one country and doesn't affect another country because of political reasons. So in order, for example, to tackle the climate change, we have to work together. So this is a message that we're sending to anybody, including, I want to be clear, including Turkey. It's up to Turkey to participate in this regional cooperation that we're trying to build.
And in terms of climate change, though, it's also up to Cyprus to look after its own and keep its own house in order.
Fully
Very
agree.
quickly, fossil fuels and renewables. We've tended to look at fossil fuels in preference to renewables. We can't lead on climate change if we're going to go with fossil fuels.
Fully agree with you. We have to do our homework also, and also at our region.
On the panel discussing the banking sector was Konstantinos Erodotou, the governor of the Central Bank of Cyprus. I caught up with him as he was rushing to another appointment after the debate, and he struck a note of caution.
Our banking sector has done a lot of progress. We need to keep on the path of continuing to rationalize the bank's balance sheet and increase confidence, but also from a wider perspective be ready for the upcoming downturn.
That's what I wanted to talk to you about. You said that you expect a downturn and that it's very important that we build a buffer. How do we do that?
Well, the Eurozone is already entering into a slowdown, and hence this was what was taken into account in the monetary policy decision of the Governing Council. Now, the slowdown in Cyprus is not as big, so we're going from a 4% GDP growth to 3%. But given our numbers and the surpluses, it's a golden opportunity. We need to create our fiscal capacity buffers to use in case we have external shocks that may make the slowdown more severe.
Yes, but what policies need to be put in place to achieve that?
Well, we already have a surplus. So all I'm saying is let's make sure that...
Let's not fritter it away.
That's a good way of putting it.
The governor of the Central Bank of Cyprus, Konstantinos Erodotou. Our Minister of Energy, Commerce and Industry, Yorgos Lakotripis, spoke in the section on hydrocarbons. One of the things that you said in the conference at the question time was that you didn't think we could afford to bring renewables much faster into the mix. Now, bearing in mind that we set our targets for renewables very low and got a little bit of a rap on the knuckles from the EU for it, as Energy Minister, I know you've been dealing for what you said 6 years with hydrocarbons, but surely in this day and age we have to look very seriously at investing more in renewables.
Oh no, on the contrary. We have been dealing as a ministry with renewables very extensively. It's just it doesn't receive, up to recently, as much attention as it should have. And I would disagree with you that we didn't receive ambitious targets for 2020 from the EU, considering the fact that we are an isolated system, which means that we're not interconnected to any other grid in Europe. The 16% in electricity production that we received is quite aggressive. And as I mentioned in my introduction, we've licensed enough projects over the past few months that would put the installed base of renewable projects by 2020 to 20%. So this is not a negligible number, again, considering the challenges that Cyprus specifically faces, which is its lack of interconnectivity with the rest of the grid. What I did mention is, as fast as we would have liked, and this is not a challenge that only Cyprus faces, as much as we would have liked to go faster with renewables, cost is certainly an element, and I would explain what I mean. Assume that we go all out with solar, right? So there's sunshine during the day, there's none during the evening. What does this mean? It means that we would have to install storage systems. Storage systems today are expensive. So should we do that while they're still at their peak, or should we push hard, that the consumer will have to bear a pretty hectic cost. Now, if as society we're prepared to pay this excessive cost sometimes in order to introduce renewables, this is a different topic.
But it would also create green jobs. I mean, there's a lot of potential, not just with solar, but with other sorts, and batteries are getting cheaper.
Oh yes, absolutely. And as solar is getting cheaper, and have you seen our recent programs that we announced? We are giving grants of up to €1,000 for people to install photovoltaic panels on their rooftops. Right? And this is beyond the commercial which I just mentioned. We are granting out grants to people, which could amount to about 20 or 25% of the total cost, so we can reduce the amount of time it takes for them to pay back for their investment, so that they can install photovoltaic panels on their roof. So
we tried that before, and a lot of people ended up either getting very delayed payments or not getting paid at all.
Oh, so no, this is with net metering. We already have about 12,000, 13,000 households on this program, and now with the new grant scheme that we are offering, right? We are seeing an accelerated adoption. So I don't think there is any doubt that we have launched a lot of programs that will hopefully get us where we want, both in 2020 and 2030. Now, the fundamental challenges are not only with electricity production. The fundamental issues that we face are, of course, in transport as well.
Yeah, infrastructure for electric cars. We're lacking that totally, aren't we?
And not totally, but certainly we need to do more. And this is also another area where both the Ministry of Transport, which is a competent ministry, and my ministry are working together to try to accelerate the adoption of charging stations and fast charging stations. So there's no doubt that there is a lot that needs to be done.
And what about government subsidies or encouragement somehow for, let's say, electric vehicle purchase?
Again, this is something that we need to speak to the Ministry of Transport. I know they're preparing a scheme for electric vehicles, but you need to get the details from them.
And in terms of energy consumption, so many people have visited the island in the last few years and talked about smart cities and greening the cities, which will reduce the temperature and therefore the need in the summer for electricity, for air conditioning, and all of that sort of thing. How far involved is your ministry in those rather alternative, one might say?
I would say that the one topic which my ministry has responsibility is for energy saving. Energy saving measures, and we have spent over the past 4 or 5 years tens of millions in giving grants and subsidies out to people, to consumers and businesses, to make sure that their house or their business is energy efficient. So we're focusing heavily on energy efficiency. We will continue to do so, as of course we're focusing on the generation of electricity from renewable sources.
Last question, back to the hydrocarbons and the idea that a floating LNG plant is probably financially unviable with the quantities we might get.
Oh no, we were always looking for, as a first priority, onshore LNG, and that's the one that demanded a lot of quantities of gas. And I can tell you, with the amount of discoveries we have so far, we're still not there.
Yes, so what are we going to do? Because there was talk about selling it to Egypt, and yet you'd have to build a pipeline to get it there.
And we are very close to, as a matter of fact, coming to an agreement on that for the Aphrodite field. Because today we have more discoveries. We have Galapagos, we have Calypso, as well.
But when will they actually start pumping?
With the development plan, which has been submitted by the companies having the rights for Aphrodite, are talking about first gas in 2025.
Which is a long way down the road.
This is how long this kind of projects take. Infrastructure. You talked about the pipeline, and the pipeline is the easy piece. The difficult piece is to actually construct the facilities needed and develop the field.
Yeah, but it's also difficult to predict what the price of gas will be by then.
The companies are ready to go ahead with it, right? And they know their job better than us, right? This is what they do. They are prepared to go ahead with this deal, and already there are some preliminary indications about what the price would be, and it seems that they feel they could be competitive.
Cyprus Minister of Energy, Commerce and Industry, Yorgos Lakotripis. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.